What if we could grow the future of food instead of, the old-fashioned way? We're diving into cultivated meat. Meat made from cells. No farm needed.
Sounds sci-fi.
Yeah, a
Right.
little bit. But it gets even more interesting when you realize this isn't just about the science. It's about ethics, culture, all these big questions we're going to unpack.
Right, because food is never just food, is it?
Exactly. And our guide for this deep dive is a book by Luca Lo Sapio called, the English title is Cultivated Meat.
Lo Sapio, he's a big name in bioethics,
He
right?
is. So he's not just looking at the how of all this, but the should we.
And the should we is a pretty big deal here.
Huge. And Lo Sapio's argument, it's pretty bold. He says cultivated meat, it's actually ethically superior to the meat we're used to.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does he figure that?
Less animal suffering, smaller environmental impact.
Hmm.
Sounds good on paper.
Sure.
But, and you knew there had to be a but.
Right.
Right. How does this lab-grown food fit in with centuries of tradition and culture? It's not quite as simple as just swapping out a burger, is it?
Not even close. And that's where things get really fascinating. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there.
I mean, imagine.
When we think about food, it's so tied up with culture and history, isn't it?
Totally.
It's like our rituals and traditions, all these things that go way beyond just eating to survive.
It's true.
And Lo Sapio makes a really good point about this. He talks about practices like hunting or
Yeah.
harvesting,
Hmm.
These are things that have been passed down for generations, these skills, this knowledge. It's about connecting with nature,
Mm.
with our past even. It's pretty deep when you think about it.
It is.
And with cultivated meat, you kind of skip over all of that. It's like you're taking the culture out of the equation. And that's where we get into this idea of culinary imperialism.
Culinary imperialism. Okay, I'm not going to lie. That sounds a little intense.
I know, right? Sounds like we're about to be invaded by lab-grown burgers or something. But seriously, it's something to consider.
Okay, so what does it actually mean?
Well, it's this idea that by pushing cultivated meat as the better option, more ethical, better for the planet, all that, are we at risk of pushing aside these rich food cultures that have existed for centuries, especially in parts of the world where those traditions are so central to who they are.
It's a good point.
It's like, imagine your grandma's famous lasagna recipe.
Oh, man, the best.
Exactly. And suddenly it's like, oh, that's cute, but here's the lab-grown version. It's healthier and more efficient. Progress is great, but not if it means losing these connections to our past, to our heritage.
It's like we can't forget about the human element.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to another important concept, food sovereignty, which is basically the right of people to define their own food systems, to have control over how their food is produced and consumed.
Which is something we often take for granted.
For sure. And this is a big concern with cultivated meat. If it's all controlled by these big corporations, well,
It could actually harm the communities it's supposed to help.
yeah, and it's not just theoretical. We've seen this happen before with industrial agriculture.
Like how it's harmed indigenous communities.
Yeah. Precisely. Lo Sapio brings up that parallel in the book, and it's like, we can't afford to make the same mistakes again.
Hmm.
We need to make sure that this new technology is actually empowering communities, not further marginalizing them.
It really makes you think about the trade-offs, doesn't it? Like, on the one hand, I see the potential for a food system that's better for animals, better for the planet. But then we have to consider these cultural implications, these potential economic downsides, and it's a lot.
It is, and it's easy to get caught up in the shiny new tech, but like Lo Sapio says, we can't just assume that lab-grown equals automatically better.
Right, right. And he actually has this line in the book that really struck me. He says, we need to be cautious about this idea of cultivated meat as some kind of superior, morally pure alternative.
Totally, because it's not about purity, it's about considering all the angles.
Exactly. Because, to be fair to Lo Sapio, he does acknowledge the potential benefit.
For sure. He's not anti-science or anything.
No, not at all. Like, reducing harm to animals, that's a good thing.
Absolutely.
It's more like, how do we balance that with all these other factors? So where do we even go from here? Is there, like, a middle ground? Can we use this technology in a way that supports progress, but also protects cultural diversity and prevents, unintended consequences?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I don't think Lo Sapio claims to have all the answers, but he's definitely pushing us to start asking the right questions now.
Right.
Before it's too late.
And that's something we can all do. like as individuals, right?
Absolutely. Stay informed, engage in these conversations. Don't be afraid to challenge the companies developing this technology.
Ban transparency.
Exactly. Because we're not just talking about the future of food, we're talking about the future, period. And we all have a stake in that.
100%. We can't just be passive consumers. We have to be active participants in shaping this technology. And there's one more thing for the book I wanted to touch on before we wrap up. Lo Sapio, he only briefly mentions the economic side of all this.
Oh, right. And that's huge.
Right. Like, if this stuff does become cheaper, way cheaper than traditional meat, who benefits? Are we going to see small farmers pushed out? Are certain communities going to be priced out of being able to afford meat at all?
These are big questions, and they're not just about economics, they're about justice, about equity.
Exactly. It all circles back to those bigger questions about what kind of future we want to create.
Well said.
And that feels like a good place to leave it for today.
Yeah, lots to think about.
We've only just scratched the surface here on the deep dive. This is a conversation that's going to keep evolving, so keep those questions coming. Until next time.